I could.
I could be wrong.
I could.
I could.
I could be wrong. I could be
I
wrong.
could be.
I could.
I could be wrong.
Could be.
I could be.
I could be. You know, I could be wrong.
Hey, welcome back to the I Could Be Wrong podcast. It's a podcast where Pastor Matthew and I sit down on a weekly basis and talk about different things happening in the world that might feel contentious to talk about, that might be worrisome, things that might be polarizing. And the point of the podcast is to exemplify how to have discourse, how to talk about challenging things in a way that's still kind, that's encouraging, and more than anything, glorifies God. How you doing today, Matthew?
I am doing well. How you doing?
Awesome, doing well. I'm excited to be back. We took last week off, and we are back this week talking about a topic that I'm excited about, but we decided to also start with a new segment. We're just going to open up with a hot take with like no context. We're not going to argue about it. We're just going to drop a hot take at the beginning of each episode now.
Yep.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
So my hot take this time is I think in the Olympics, when it comes to swimming events, there should not be any designated strokes of what they have to do. So like, you know how we have, I could be wrong on the sense of, I might not name all of them, but we have backstroke, we have breaststroke, we have butterfly,
Like
and I think freestyle.
Yeah.
And I think nothing should be defined. It should be a free for all because the other ones besides like freestyle make no sense, because if you compare it to its counterpart in running, we don't say like, okay, now this race you're going to run backwards. Now this race you're going to skip. This one you're going to run goofy. So I think it should be, the only difference is if it's an individual versus team, like relay, and the distances. But I also think that they should bring in some type of hurdle in the water, like we have hurdles in running. Because like, I think that they'll be strong enough, the swimmers, to like swim and like come out of the water and get over.
TV,
it would make for a better thing. So I think all things should be freestyle. So you just pick. So
maybe
like
add some obstacles in it.
and maybe add obstacles like a hurdle event. But like I think even if they want to swim all the way underwater and back, like you know how they do the dolphin swim when they first hop in. Like I don't know if there's any restriction on how far they can go. But I think the idea that there's
do it, no rules. That's fair.
And here's why, like when I got in the water one time, like I was just like mimicking the strokes, and I was like, now all the swimmers are gonna hate me. And I know we have like swimmers and swimming coaches in our church, but like when I did it, I was like, this just feels stupid. Like this doesn't feel like a good way, to
bad way to swim.
Yeah, like the coming out of the water and different things. Now backstroke, that's like my go-to.
Yeah, that's what you move.
Yeah, if I feel like I have to swim, I'm a bad swimmer, so I'm like roll on my back, use some of my belly weight to keep me afloat and backstroke.
You know what? I don't know why every time I'm in a pool, this is like my default thing, is it's like the guy thing where you just look at a gap and you think like, I could jump that far. I have a similar thing with like, I could swim that far underwater. It doesn't matter how big the pool is. I always look at it and think like, I can do that. I went swimming with my dad this last summer, and he did it all the time growing up. He is like, he can hold his breath for such an insane amount of time. And there's some stuff that for no reason, you and I have talked about this before, that your dads are just uniquely good at.
Right.
I don't know why. Like, I think you said your dad was like shut down pool player.
Yeah, phenomenal.
It's like, how? Like, when did you get so great at pool? My dad's like that with swimming. We went to a guy in our church's pool, and we took our kids over there. He was out of town. He let us use it. And I was feeling strong. I was like, right, my dad, he's old. He's an old man. I can finally take him down. And I swam underwater like there and back again. And I'm like, there's no way. His lungs will pop. And he did it twice as far. Got out, not like hardly breathing hard. And I was like, what? Is there ever going to be a time in my life? You know what else I was thinking when you're talking?
That's dad rage.
That's just like, I will not be beat by my child.
By
rage.
my kid.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about swimming is like that means Michael Phelps winning 8 gold medals. It's really all just like, oh, so you swim fast. Because it's just like you go to the different kinds of swimming fast. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's not like he won it at 8 sports. This is so disrespectful.
Right. I know. Reducing his accomplishment down to
so basically you can swim pretty good. Okay.
Oh, good for you. Yeah.
All right, here's mine. I think that that protein in a dietary sense, I think it's mostly a sham.
That we need to have protein in our
No,
diets?
not that we need to have protein. That it's like the most important supplement. I saw a guy on TikTok, I'm a millennial, so if I see one video on the internet, I'm going to do no research and I'm going to tell people about it. But in the spirit of this hot take thing, this is my new hot take. Basically, what this guy was saying is that, like, do you know why protein? Everyone's saying it's the most important thing because it's easy to sell. Like anybody can sell a protein supplement. You can't really sell a fat supplement, like a really healthy, clean fat supplement. That would be really hard to do in a big way.
Yeah.
He said what's way more interesting is like vitamin D. And he basically went down a list of things that you can't really bottle that really increase your health and make you muscular and make you. And I just heard it with doing no research. I was like, that's not my opinion.
Okay, so I'm doing no research and it's now my truth. I totally agree with that. I am.
Have you heard about people's protein consumption? About their like they have to eat like 200 grams a day or something insane like that?
Yeah, and I'm like, no.
You're waking up every 3 hours to eat protein.
Right, and also like for the vast majority of history, like protein was like somewhat of a premium. Like people were just
you had to hunt for it, right?
Right, yeah. You're just not eating that much meat. And I have this conviction. This makes me sound like more spiritual than I'm trying to be. But I have a conviction that God knew what He was doing when He created us and designed us. And so, like, whenever someone tells me, in order for us to thrive, we have to do something that's like not natural, and that like that protein intake through supplements, I'm always like, come on.
Yeah, it feels like a big stretch when people talk about the volumes of like. And I'm sure there's some merit to it. I just don't know that that's he's gonna be really mad at me as your brother Chris, because every time we talk about weight stuff, he's like, "Well, how's your protein?" I'm like, "Dude."
Yeah, but this is also my brother Chris, who was like, "I'm gonna go switch over from Apple phones to Google phones." He did for a week, and he was like telling me like, "This is the greatest thing ever." I'm like, "No, it's not." And then like a week later, he was like, "I made a horrible mistake." Like, Chris goes all in.
Did he do that
things.
with being a vegan too for a second? And he did it for a while, right? He was
No,
like a vegan for like 3 months.
Chris was like, "I'm going vegan," and like my whole family was like, "Yeah, no, you're not." And I think he might have done it for like 3 months.
Yeah, because I want to say Pastor Skip did it too, where they had some kind of stretch of time where they tried it.
Yeah, but they were like funny because they were like vegans, like Skip and my mom. They were like vegans, but then if anyone invited them over, they didn't tell them that, so they would eat meat because they didn't want to be like the vegans that basically inconvenience everybody.
Yeah. That's kind of so they would do it if they're around, if like to not. So they would still do it if they're around. That's kind of cool.
I think they eat. Whatever.
That's kind of because that's the joke with vegans and like CrossFit is like, how do you know if someone's a vegan? They'll tell you about it. Yeah, because it's like they're so evangelistic about it. That's kind of the cool move.
The also thing with your protein thing that why it seems like so true to me is how many things in one generation everyone was into until someone like asked the tough question of like, wait, is this real? Because I remember there was a minute ago, I don't know if you ever got caught up in this, but everyone was like, you have to take fish oil. Like fish oil is the cure all. Like
omega-3 and
and then I was just one day, all these supplements people were saying you should take. I started researching every single one and found out almost like every single one, doctors were like, you don't need, if you have a basically balanced diet, you don't need to take these things. But one of them was like the fish oil. People were saying there's never even been a study done that proves any of the things it's claimed. And then there was a stretch. Do you remember where this is only a couple years ago where people were like, coconut oil, I think, right? Yeah, coconut oil. They were like, this is like the magic pill, whatever.
Super holistic.
And then other people were like, no, stop taking this. There's a lot of fat in it.
Yeah, it's like only fat.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, this is my new hot take. I think it's all the FDA's fault. So if you work for the FDA, I'm sorry. They don't monitor any of it. And they also so rapidly change, and they change with authority. So when I was a kid, do you remember like the food pyramid? I don't know if we had the same food pyramid. They've changed it so many times. When I was a kid, the traditional food pyramid, which had like 8 servings of wheat a day on it, was like the base level.
Right,
this is. Then at the top was like sugar and sweets. And then fruit and veggies were in the middle. And now it's totally flipped. Like veggies needs to be mostly what you eat. And then protein. And then grains is like right next to sugar. That's the FDA. That's not some person's opinion. I was taught that in school. Like with authority, this is the right way to eat.
Okay, so I watched, again, TikTok, but there's this doctor. We were actually just talking about it in the office over there. There's a doctor that I watch. This one's actually a heart doctor. And he said, like, things you just need to know. And one of them was like, you guys need to keep eating eggs. Super healthy. He's like, there was a stretch where people were like, you can't eat eggs and it's bad.
Cholesterol or something.
Yeah, and he was like, it's totally good for you. And he named a couple other things that way where I'm like, how? Fat was another one. He's like, you need fat. Like
Todd
in your
Hansen
diet.
told me that. Where it's just like there's like such a slandering towards fat, where it's like a big misunderstanding. But I think it's because some stuff is profitable and some's not. Like and some isn't. Like that's always the thing I try to keep in mind is all of these things have money behind them. Very rarely is someone just coming out with an opinion that doesn't have like a financial invested interest into whatever they're doing.
Right. It was, again, we talked about this earlier, but like where yogurt just started claiming it's good for your gut.
Yeah.
And the FDA was like, you haven't actually done any research. Stop saying that, and like sued them over it. But yet, I would say most people, when they think of yogurt, they think, yeah, that's good for your stomach.
Well, yeah. Well, Molly was just saying specifically it was a brand. I don't want to disparage if it's the wrong brand, but I think she said Activia was the one that basically had the best marketing ever that convinced everybody that yogurt was like great for gut health. But they did such a good job. They got sued. They can't say it anymore. But they did such a good job that not only would I think that about that brand, I just still have the assumption about all yogurt. I'm like, oh yeah, yogurt's really good for gut health.
Really good for your gut health. Even the thing of gut health.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means.
Like there's like these phrases we use.
But if I have a stomach ache, I'm sure my mom would be like, oh, you should have some yogurt. You know what I mean? Like it's that like into the culture at this point.
Yeah.
All right. So for this week, we're going to talk about really two things. I sent you two different thoughts and two different kind of world events that were happening. And I think we kind of decided that it's really the same thing, or at least our response is. So the two things we want to talk about are, one, Christians and their pliability and how susceptible or
susceptible, right?
Christians and their response to conspiracy theories. I'll say
I know
because that word's going to trip me up.
Susceptible.
Susceptibility.
Yeah,
I think that's it. Christians,
yeah.
their susceptibility to conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And then also legitimate valid threats. So the first
Right.
one I actually sent you last week, where there was I was actually just looking it up, and I sent you the article I found last week, but the update this week is that they actually think they found it. It might not be that big of a deal. But last week I sent you this thought that I saw on Reddit that was, there's this nuclear there's nuclear submarine that just went missing. This Russian nuclear submarine that usually people have tabs on, that is carrying this like long range weapon, and it's kind of experimental. Nobody knows if it works yet. Just disappeared. And everyone's like, okay, well, has it come to American shores? Right. And then there was a Russian ex-official or something like that who said, oh, it probably is. That's happened a lot of times. You guys just don't know about it. Their stealth systems are so incredible.
Yeah.
So I sent you that as a thought about, we can talk about World War III. We can talk about the potential incoming threat or nuclear fallout. How do Christians handle that? And then the other thing we can talk about is I shared an article this morning, is all about conspiracy theories, about how Christians are so quick to buy into doomsday stuff, how they're so quick to go to a heart of fear. And the specific article that I shared with you that you told me today, you read this a couple years ago when COVID was really, we were in the throes of that, was basically a question being posed as to why Christians are so open to conspiracy theories and to taking them so seriously and then to make decisions based off of them. So I think I'd like to start with that one.
Yeah.
What is, in your opinion, why is it that Christians seem to be so pliable? Where it's like, if we hear something that feels where maybe the average Joe or someone who's not an American Christian, they might say, no, it's probably not true. Why does it seem to be the trend that Christians buy into that stuff, whether it be the really aggressive stuff like QAnon, or it could be COVID things, it could be rumors of war, it could just be misinformation on Facebook. Why does it seem that stuff takes such a captive audience within Christians?
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to acknowledge is it's not just our opinion that Christians are falling into conspiracy theories. I mean, there's studies being done. They're interviewing Christians, and percentage-wise, they really do buy into conspiracy theories more. My personal opinion about it is, I'll say there's two parts to this. One is, as a nation, I think we have less and less trust in government officials, and even I would just say officials as a whole, or just like leadership and information. So like I remember reading one study about this, that basically during the Vietnam War is when Americans for the first time in large numbers lost their trust of the government, because the government came out and lied. So the government was saying different things about the war that turned out not to be true. Yeah. And up until that point, there was, whether it was accurate or not, there was an impression the government, at least they're telling us the truth. Even if it's bad news, they're telling us the truth. And then all of a sudden they didn't. Then at the same time, you have like that whole season where you have like President Nixon and his that, and then like obviously President Kennedy gets killed. And a lot of people thought like, well, they're not telling us the truth on this, and the Warren Commission and all the stuff that went into it. And so people really started to have a distrust. And I don't think, and I don't say this just to throw shade, but I think we can just say factually, I don't think the government has much credibility, because politicians. I don't think that's
controversial.
Yeah, that's not even controversial at this point. They lie all the time. They're caught in lies. Yeah. There's very self-serving elements. Like when you break down any of the spending bills, it's so shady, the amount of money that's being spent on weird things. So there's like that. That's just an underlying thing of all people.
That totally makes sense.
That's all Americans, right? Yeah. I think this is really a redemptive way of looking at it. I think the reason why Christians are more susceptible to conspiracy theories is because I think we believe, as a foundation of our faith, a conspiracy theory. So what I mean by that is we have this conviction. We need to probably define a conspiracy theory. How I'm thinking about it is a conspiracy theory is like a theory that maybe can't be proven. Yeah. And but yet, it might have some evidence for it, maybe some against it, but it can't be proven. Yeah, maybe you can define it. But for me, I think Christians, the foundation of our belief system is that there is a spiritual realm. Yeah. And so like we believe in things that require faith. and that can go, I wouldn't say it necessarily goes against evidence, but there are elements of it that we can't prove.
Sure.
And even with that, so not only do we worship a God who is a spirit, I mean, this is what Jesus said, those who worship the Father must worship him in spirit and truth, because he is, the Father is a spirit. And so we have the God who we worship is in a different realm than the physical, who we are. But on top of that, what we're told in Scripture is that there are demonic forces. Satan and the angels that fell are working against us, and they're influencing the leadership of our world and the countries and different people.
It's funny that you say that. I pulled up the definition of conspiracy theory, and it defines exactly what you just said about, the powers that be and about Satan. It literally says a belief that some covert but influential organization, which you can, you can place that with Satan, is responsible for a circumstance or an event.
Okay.
So that simply put is that there's something that we can't see that is influential impacting these events around us. That
Absolutely.
By nature, you could be describing God, Satan, things unseen that are impacting the world around us.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the positive, we believe in God.
Absolutely.
In the negative, which Jesus confirmed.
Yeah.
In the negative, Satan and demonic forces, I mean, Paul even worded it this way. He said they have schemes, and schemes are like basically like military strategies against us. So we have a conviction that there is this reality going on that's unseen, that's working against us. And so we believe in that.
Yeah.
So as that mixes with the unethical leadership in our world, in our government, even news sources and all that, and then on top of it, I think the news manipulates us even more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the natural bent that we have in faith is to some degree getting manipulated to the negative.
Yeah.
So like our faith element, when it's healthy, allows us to embrace things that, I mean, genuinely require faith, and it can go to a healthy place, relying on God and growing deeper with our relationship with God. In an unhealthy sense, it allows us to start to be pulled away, and we start to lose peace in our heart, which I think if we take a step back and realize Jesus is never going to give us a pathway that's going to rob us of peace. Mm-hmm. So like if we're believing things and stressing about things, that's not the pathway that Jesus is like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted for you as a Christian. I wanted you to believe this and believe that, so it removes all peace from your life, and destroy your life. So I think that's what we need to, obviously talk about today.
Yeah. And I would say something, I would say the same thing. That's something I was telling you, I told my dad about this before I came in today. He asked what the podcast is going to be about. And I told him that basically the foundation of our faith, which in theory should be the foundation of everything we do, every decision we make, is based on things that we can't see. Like a big part of my job here at the church is to sing songs to somebody who I can't physically see.
Right.
That's weird.
And never have.
I've never seen God in the person. I didn't have the privilege of walking with God in the flesh as in Jesus. Now I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, so I feel his presence, and I can tell you from my feelings what that's like. And that can be a testament. That's still anecdotal evidence, right? So like, I remember I heard, this was an atheist I was arguing, this was when I was younger, arguing with an atheist at one point, just like trying to think through like apologetics and how it applied. He's a family member. I still love him to death. Great guy. But he said like, you can't just say your personal testament to the spirit inside of you. That doesn't mean anything to me. He said, if I told you that there's a dragon in my garage and no one can see it but me, he was like, you can't prove me wrong. I was like, yeah, I can. Like, there's no evidence of it. He's like, no. I already said I can only see the evidence of it. It's like, because that's what you're telling me with your faith. It's like, I have this God that you can't see. There's no physical representation. You just have to trust me. It's like, that doesn't count. You have to find. So, that's a whole different apologetic conversation. But that really is the foundation of Christian faith, is that there's something I can't see that is impacting my life, that I feel the effects of, that not everybody else can see, which is also where I think some of the divisiveness comes from, where it's like, oh, you just can't see this. I'm already primed to tell somebody that because I'm used to telling somebody that. Right. I'm used to defending my faith by saying, if you knew or felt what I felt or experienced the presence of God, you could apply the same thing. Well, if you knew what I knew, you know what I mean? And I think where a big breakdown too comes from, like if you look at like the atheist perspective or perspective of someone who doesn't have that same faith structure, all they have is people. They don't believe that there's a God to save the day. They don't believe that there's a God to fix the situation. So they are so deep in what is physical, what is provable, and scientific evidence of what's being said, whether it be putting their faith in a politician or in science, because that's all they have. For us, it's easier for us to buy into something we can't believe because we don't believe all we have is what's physical. You know what I mean? Where that is genuinely all that people who aren't Christians can have. So I'd say that's a fairly redeemable way to look at it.
Yeah. And I think, even like if you use the argument that you and the atheist had, one of the things that I think happens for all of us, no matter what topic it is once we think we've discovered truth. Mm-hmm. So like for us in faith, if we're doing something, so we'll talk about our relationship with God. So like, okay, I feel God's presence. And so like, yeah, that's a very personal thing, but that shapes how I view the world. Now, through that experience, there's been something that's been like proven to me. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to see God move in other situations that others might not. So like when someone else shares a testimony and I hear that and I go, okay, to me, that's another proof of God. Yeah. And to the atheist, they'll look at the same thing and go like, that's not another proof. I go, oh yeah, it is. And then I go and look at creation itself, trees and how dynamic and trees and sun and all the different things. And I go, oh, so okay, there's another proof of God. And then I'm on to something else and, oh, there's another proof of God. I think the same thing happens in conspiracy theories though. So again, it's that same rhythm that, so in the positive, we just go deeper and deeper in our faith of God and our relationship with God. In the negative though, it's, I think somehow I've been exposed, and even maybe like if we're using it as a Christian perspective, maybe even the Holy Spirit has illuminated something to me. So now I think this is true. So now I go and look at all of the different comments and facts that other people post and tell me about, and all of a sudden that confirms my experience. And so in the same rhythm that we use, like almost like a standard that we use for faith, we're using that same standard in things in the earth, but those aren't actually spiritual things. And that's where it gets dangerous. Do you understand what I'm saying? So like, so on the healthy side, yes, like faith requires at times to believe stuff without sight, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to apply that to all forms of being educated and exposed. But I think that's that tension.
And I think the way you said it is perfect, because those aren't spiritual things. You know what I mean? While they might be influenced by spiritual things, sure, they're not items of our faith though. Yeah. Like they're not, what's happening in the world around me does not dictate my relationship or submission to the God that I love and serve. Yeah. That happens independently. Yeah. And I think what happens is that people, in the same way, you see patterns like you described, where I felt the presence of God. And then when I see it move in a situation, I know how to recognize it. Right. What makes that really tricky is when you do see patterns, and this is where I fall into the trap of falling for conspiracy, of like, I have seen ugliness. I've seen the badness and the wickedness of politicians. So it's easy to fall into that pattern of like, oh, that means every single thing in life must be like, and as a Christian, I also know I don't believe in like a perfectly altruistic person, someone who has just they have no sin in their life. They're perfect. I know from biblical teachings that I submit to that everybody's broken. I've seen people sin, and I know that everyone's a sinner. That means every single system, every single thing, there's probably deeper levels of sin underneath it. So that's where I find myself falling into conspiracy stuff, because it's so easy for me to assume the worst all the time. Yeah. You know, it's like the running joke: people are the worst. People are the worst. It's like really easy for me to believe. Well, of course, that worst case, the crazy thing that the government's lying to me about the Earth being flat. It's easy for me to think like, well, probably, because I just assume the worst. You've seen it, and it's that same pattern recognition. If it works for seeing miracles and seeing the movements of the Spirit, it also works in seeing like how wicked and how hurtful people can be. And then once you get into those patterns, it's really, really hard to ignore them. So then here's like a big question I have. That all doesn't seem like a negative to me. Pattern recognition doesn't seem like a bad thing. It doesn't seem like a bad thing to understand that the world's broken around us. It doesn't seem like a bad thing that my life is built, and my faith structure, meaning my life, is built on faithfulness of things unseen. So is it a positive thing then for Christians to participate in conspiracy theory? Is it a positive? Because right now it seems like well, yeah, of course. That's just so. So how can it be negative? How is it that these spiritual things that we have applied to the world around us? Because here's the other perspective. That's super logical what we're talking about. My experience is, I'm going back to what I had said with my dad, where I told him what we're talking about today. The very first thing that he said was, "Oh, are you going to talk about how silly we all look?" You know, It's the first thing that he said. My dad's like a really, that I wasn't expecting him to say that. So how is it that something that seems so spiritually mature? Yes, we believe in things unseen, so I should believe that in the political world. I should believe that with people too. Why does it make us look silly? Or do you even agree with my dad's opinion? No, that does make us look silly. Is this something we should be sinking our time and energy and effort into?
No, I 100% agree with your dad. Yeah. The reason why we look silly, to use that term, so that term, though I agree with it, I think it can come across almost a little condescending. Sure. And so I want to expound. I think we look silly, but I also think we look foolish. And those aren't always the same thing. I think we look wrong.
Silly feels more trivial.
Yeah. But I think the problem with it is we do start to lose our credibility. So here's what I want to do. I want to take a step back for a second and say, because I know where you're going with the questions, as I suspect. is, so maybe we do see patterns, and maybe it is even true. But this is where I want to pause and ask the question is, what has God asked us to carry the weight of? So what I mean by that is, if we recognize evil in the world, what is our response to it? What does God want?
That's a
So
great question.
God has never asked us to take the pressure of raising and lowering governments. So we have democracy in America, and so we have bought into the idea of like, now all the weight for choosing the president, all the weight for choosing the government, it's on our shoulders, and yet Scripture doesn't tell us that. God is still the one who raises and lowers leaders in leadership. And so what happens is we think because we're able to see evil and see patterns, which may be true or may not be true, but therefore now I have to bear the weight of that responsibility. And that's where I would say, take a step back and recognize, no, you don't. What you have to do in your own life is to be a light and to be the salt, in the sense of that is through relational context with the people that God has brought into your life, to love them and to speak truth and to model truth to them. I mean, look at even God in the flesh, and Jesus did not take the strategy of overthrowing governments. He didn't even take the strategy necessarily of taking on evil head on, in the sense that he went and spent most of his time attacking those who were spreading the false lies. Even the religious leaders, most of the rebuke from them was they initiated the relational dynamic, and then Jesus rebuked them. But Jesus didn't make the primary source of his ministry to confront Pharisees, Sadducees, Roman officials, and so on. The bulk of Jesus' ministry was loving people. And so he knew the way to ultimately combat the evil in the world is for love to spread through people. And so like in our lives, when we recognize conspiracies, if it is robbing us of peace, I don't think God is calling us down that pathway. Does that make sense? Like what I'm saying? Because I mean, when Jesus says things like, and we'll get to this as a church here soon, when he says, don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow has enough worry of its own, what do you think he's talking about? He's talking about things that stress you out. Yeah. And so like if in your world, what's stressing you out is the government and the decline of the world, I think Jesus would say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So like if your stress is financial, he's like, don't worry about that. If it's like the different evils in the world, he's like, don't worry about it. Let me worry about that.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because being raised in America, like democracy has almost tricked me into feeling like this is my problem to solve. Right. Because I'd like to consider myself like a good American citizen. Yeah. Well, it's like the JFK thing. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Right. So I do have this burden of like, no, this is my problem to solve. Us as a collective, this is our problem to solve. You and I have talked about this in the past before, where I have what I would consider a toxic bent to me at times, that I feel like I need to seek justice in every situation. Sure. When I was a kid, my mom would tell me like, you need to grow up and be a lawyer. You're an 8 in the Enneagram, a D probably in the DISC system. Yeah. Like, yeah, because I'm the same way. Yeah. It is a bent to our personalities. I need people to know that they're wrong. Yeah. If there's an injustice, where we both talked about that in our marriages in the past, where it's something that luckily I had you give me guidance on early on when I got married. But you said that you would feel like you won an argument where really someone might just give up, and almost winning that argument felt like, well, I just blessed you with more knowledge. So I'm like helping you by arguing. That's me to a T. Growing up, I feel like there has to be justice. I need you to know that you were wrong. I need this. How do you reconcile that with what you just said? Like if we just say, well, it's not my problem to worry about, so then do we just let America go? Like if all these conspiracy theories are true, because that feels like what you're saying. Like, well, what if they are true? Is this our responsibility? How do I still justify being a patriot or being a good steward of my citizenship if I'm like, well, whatever, just let it happen? Who's there to do justice? How does that work out? Yeah.
Well, the hardest tension that I think modern day Christian American Christians, whichever order you're going to look at that they have is I think a lot of them think that their duties as an American supersede their duties as a Christian. And I think like we've talked about this before. I talked about it on the podcast when my friend Tim had me come and do a podcast with him, that you have to decide, are you an American Christian or a Christian American? Like whichever one comes first is the priority. As an American, you have all these responsibilities, but when it's a Christian first, that's your number one priority. And then all of the secondary things of your responsibility as a patriot, as a citizen, all of those are, again, secondary things. So as a Christian, your responsibility is to model Jesus, and to follow his teachings and to walk in obedience. So like Jesus literally, speaking through Paul, literally says, he says, whatever is noble and true, meditate on these things. Because what he recognizes is the human heart, if we focus too much on the negative. So like earlier on, Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. For what comes out of the heart is, and he starts to list all of these behaviors. Like, so he's like, out of the heart comes, like he talks about sexual immorality and gossip, slander, divisions, all this envious and all these different things that come out of the heart. What we put into our heart starts to impact our behaviors. So as a Christian, I have to be protective of my heart so that I can properly reflect Jesus to the world. Yeah. So I have to reflect love. I have to reflect peace to the world. I have to not put on an image of peace. I have to experience peace in my life. So like in Philippians where Paul says, basically, if you're going through anything that's causing stress in your life, surrender that to God through prayer and supplication, and he will give you a peace that surpasses human understanding. Peter says, take all of your cares and cast them. It's like the image of a person who casts like a fishing thing, in the sense of you throw it out there. He's like, cast, or casting a net. Cast all your cares to God, knowing he cares about them. So the things in our life that are stressing us out, we give to God first. And then from that place, so like my heart, I'm protecting my heart so that I can love well and I can have peace. I'm giving those things to God. Then from that place, I engage my responsibilities as a citizen. Yeah. But if I don't have a healthy mind and heart, then I can't properly be an American citizen. Yeah. So here's where people get this twisted. Yeah, they go like, oh, you're putting Christianity over patriotism. And I would go, yes. Okay. And they go, that feels like bad for America. And I would go, no.
What if it's the best for America?
That's the best thing. That's what I would say. That's the best thing for America is Americans need Christians to reflect Christ to the country. And once that spreads, it will impact politics. It will start to impact communities. And I think we're trying to too much where we're falling back on, and this is the problem is, as Christians, we're feeling like the best thing that we can do is to seize power through elections and whatnot, and then legislate morality. And again, we've talked about this numerous times, but
that's super good, though.
You cannot legislate morality. People will resent that. But what you can do that people don't resent is you can model a lifestyle that has a better quality of life so people can be drawn to it. And then when they ask you and you can point to Jesus, that is an incredible gift. Yeah. If the people around you have peace, then that's the greatest gift that you show them how to get peace. So there was a Saturday Night Live sketch in the last couple of weeks in the newest season where it's a game show where this guy just gets people on there and he tries to trigger them. And have you seen this one? No. And so he just gets people and they're like, oh no, I'm going to be super calm. And each one has like different thing that shows like they've been triggered. So like one person, they set like a glass of wine in front of them. Another one, like they give them a glass that they can break, like they throw on the ground. And another one was like, you can punch this like flight attendant because that's like popular. I mean, Saturday Night Live can go dark. Yeah. But the person just started reading all the stuff that's going on in the world. And each of these people, they all spaz out. They all freak out. Yeah. And so they're using humor, but they're using humor to address a very serious problem in our culture is all of this information isn't leading people toward a higher quality of life. Yeah. It's leading them toward despair. And so like when we buy into conspiracy theories and all of that, and it robs us of peace, I just think it would be like this. I mean, one last thing and I'll pass it. No, It'd be like right now if Darby came to you and started saying to you, Dad, I am super, super stressed about our electric bill this month, and I am super stressed about our mortgage. You would just say to her, sweetie, you'd never have to worry about that. That's my responsibility. Right? Yeah. And you'd go like, you need to just be a child and enjoy life and have peace. That's the exact same thing. God's going, guys, you literally are worried about things. I did not ask you to concern yourself.
Yeah, that's super good.
And so that's the image that I think we have to understand.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, there's a comparison that I thought of when you were talking. It felt like putting the cart before the horse. Like, well, if I want to be a good citizen, there's so much even relief of you saying like, okay, but what if the best way to be a good citizen is to be the best Christian? Like, know, and that makes your country better. It's a thought that I have that I remember blew my mind when I first heard it. I grew up, I don't know about you, but I grew up where my parents would always use, my family. We speak in absolutes. All absolutes. Of us. They, in the most extreme of language.
Can I tell you one your sister said today?
Sure, I loved it.
She goes, my eyes are so bad. Because we're talking about like people's like, would they get LASIK? I had LASIK years ago. And so she said, my eyes are so bad. She's like, I just basically have worthless eyeballs. And I was like, so what's your prescription? She's like,
it's probably completely
one
reasonable.
1.5 and 2 or something like that. And so she comes over to the edge of the table. This is across the whole room. And we have all of our staff values on the wall. They're all different font size. Yeah. She can basically read almost every single one. So I go, Mary, and she was like, okay, I realize now, you know.
That's like such a funny running joke of like, if me and Mary are at a meeting, something exaggeratory is going to be said.
Yeah.
Never out of a spirit of like lying or dishonesty.
No,
It's just because it's like, we just talk in big language, like, oh, that was the worst ever.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the best ever. It's just cultural.
Yeah.
But so my parents growing up would always say very intense things about how much they loved us. Like I would take a bullet for you. Like I would do anything for you. And I remember my dad told me once about my mom. He's like, I would use her as a human shield to protect you guys. Where that was a value in our home. Like our kids come first. And that's how, and I think that's probably normal in our American culture now, even more today than it was when I was a kid. We see it with parents will just like, well, I haven't went on a date in 10 years because of kids' sports, which is like, what? That's crazy, right?
Yeah, right.
But we have such a value system of loving kids. And I remember I had a teacher of all people. I think she had to have been a Christian. She was a language arts teacher. And she told me once of like, I love my husband so much more than my kids. Yeah. And I remember that it was the first time I ever heard that. And it made me think so little of her initially. Because I was like 17. I was like a senior in high school. I never thought like that. Yeah. The only thing that I knew is my
You're
parents.
a millennial. You can't even fathom
also,
that.
I'm a millennial. The world's all about me.
Well, and your parents your whole life have told you about that.
Yeah,
right.
This is my whole universe.
Yeah.
It's like, it's also that like 90s parenting strategy where I was told growing up of like, you can do anything. You can be anything, which is like, not super true. Right. I really wanted to be a baseball player, but you just can't do some things. But I remember she told me that, and I was like, that's crazy that you would say that. Like, do your kids just feel like you don't even like, that would make me feel so unsafe and insecure as a kid. And then I thought a lot about it, and I remember, I don't know if I asked her about it, if I asked someone else about it. I don't remember how it all broke down and where I really came to like a more enlightened, belief on it. But basically, it was her. She basically explained herself because initially it felt so aggressive. And she said, my kids are going to leave me one day. Like they're going to be gone and they're going to be married. And the best gift I can give to them, to show them how to prioritize your spouse over everything else so they can one day prioritize their spouse. It's like, I need them to know that my happiness is not contingent on them. I don't want them to have that burden. I don't want them to have to feel guilty when they leave. And the way she explained it felt like such a light bulb of like, sure. But that's what it made me think of when you're talking about your responsibility as a citizen of like, it's not, she didn't love her kids less because she loved her husband more. You're not loving America less because you love God more. Like you love America enough to make sure you have right priorities. You know?
So you're that lady, which I totally agree with her. I tell my kids like, love isn't I love more, it's I love different, right? Sure. But I tell my kids, like, mom is my priority because one day you're going to leave. But the reason why that's such a gift to them is I'm modeling for them healthy marriage. The greatest gift I could give my kids concerning marriage is for them to know how to love their spouse better. That's
awesome.
Right? You know what I mean? And so that's exactly what you're saying. So like the best thing we could ever give to our country is that of modeling love, not freaking out about conspiracy theories. Yeah. And so like, even with conspiracy theories, buying into them when it's not rooted in facts, the best case, even if it's true, the majority of people don't believe conspiracy theories. So even if it's true, it doesn't look true. And now you've just lost some credibility. Yeah. So if it's not a genuine thing that is impacting people right now, and you're just believing like, I don't want to give examples because I don't want to get too targeted, but like I know people like that have told me they're conspiracy theories, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not rooted in anything factual, and so you're asking us to believe something just based on your hunch, and
and I want to get into what that does. You could tell I was kind of going there earlier, getting into the Christian witness, but before we get into how that views people's perception of us and what it means for evangelism and the Christian perception, let's talk about the other side of this. What we're talking about is, let's not worry about conspiracy theories, because let's worry about what's in our control. What about stewardship over like your life when real threats are impending? So we talked about this nuclear submarine off the grid. Yeah. There is a reality, and you have a lot of different people who respond differently. And I want to hear your opinion on it. You have some people who full blown have like doomsday shelters. They're like, they've spent a lot of time and money into stockpiling weapons just in case there was some kind of like a government breakdown or a rioting and looting situation. You have people who store canned goods. You have people who, with the threat of incoming war, with the threat of anything like that, because we can't just pretend like it's not possible. We've had two world wars. We've had, we've had terrorism. We've had 9/11. 9/11 was such a pivotal thing in my lifetime. We've seen things like that. I can't just pretend like it's not possible. Right. So is there something to be said for stewardship of your time, money, resources for actual threats, or would you just say, no, keep going into just loving people more? Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Like a real threat versus just a theory?
Yeah. Well, yes, the question totally makes sense. Let me try to define real threat just so we can. So if someone is threatening your family, it's a real threat. Absolutely, get police involved, right? I mean, like If someone's making threats against my kids, I'm going to get the school involved. We're going to work through that. So it's real personalized. Yes, that's it within your rights. I mean, just to look at Paul. Paul was arrested and being mistreated, and he used his rights as a Roman citizen. He goes, "Hey, you guys, I'm a Roman citizen. That comes with rights." And they were like shocked by it. They're like, "You're right." And so he utilized that because it wasn't impacting his witness. So he utilized that. Okay. In the sense of like, if we're talking about...
Russia. What if...
Yeah, Russia's...
Like they could potentially bomb us. How do I respond, you know?
This is where I think what is different between a Christian and a non-Christian. For a Christian, our hope is not in this earth.
Wow.
And we have to lose sight. We cannot lose sight of that. We have to keep that in context that I'm not like the biggest threat to me is not that you can take my physical life, right? Because if you kill me, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Wow.
So I'm going to operate differently. Now, I'm saying this, and I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. There's no irony to or sarcasm to this. If I'm not a Christian, I am living differently. I'm probably building a bunker. That's an extreme version of it. But because all I have to look forward to is what this physical life has to offer. And so I want to defend it. I want to make the most of it. I mean, Paul says that. He goes in Corinthians, he's like, if there's no resurrection, what he's talking about is the afterlife. He's not just talking about being killed and coming back to life. He's talking about the afterlife and eternity. He goes, if there is no resurrection, no eternity, then you should eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. That's what he said. So he's saying you should live for the now. So a person who doesn't have a relationship with God should be very cautious in their life. They should be very protective in their life. They should be, honestly, to some degree, some selfish in their life because this is all this world has to offer.
Yeah.
But for us as Christians, we have a completely different. So here, let me give you some context. Let me just like illustrate this.
Yeah.
So there's a scripture in Matthew 24 where Jesus, he's using a teaching moment, and he looks at the temple. So the temple in their culture, the King Herod had built, and it was like at the time one of the wonders of the world. It was big and beautiful and marvelous. It took so many men, so much money to get it all, to get it all built. And then Jesus says that Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the building of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all of these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And what he's referencing is something that would happen in AD 70, where they would come in and lay siege to Jerusalem and eventually destroy the temple. And because they had to lay siege to Jerusalem, which meant like surround it and basically starve people out, the generals were so mad that they had to do that. When they came in, they tore the temple down brick by brick and took the bricks and threw them into like basically a canyon area because they were so mad about it. So Jesus is prophetically speaking about it. But if you think about it from the Jewish perspective and like his disciples, they're like, this building looks like unbeatable, right?
Yeah.
They can't even imagine that reality. So they're going to go to fear. And then it said this, as Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will rise and lead astray, and much lawlessness will be increased, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel, and gospel means good news. He goes, and this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So I just want to note something. So what I just described, that sounds like the worst, right?
Sounds awful. Yeah.
Completely awful. But he says to you in this, he goes, there will be wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed.
Yeah.
Like he's literally saying to him, the worst will happen.
Yeah.
And some of you are going to experience the worst. And he's prophetically speaking, this prophecy is to potentially this group, but he's also prophetically speaking for what we haven't even experienced. That's like the powerful thing about prophecy. There's oftentimes an immediate element to it, a future, and then a distant future. But what Jesus is saying is, don't be alarmed, because all of you, those who are killed, those who are persecuted, those who experience all these negative, this isn't your hope.
Yeah.
There's a greater hope coming.
Yeah.
And when you understand that, you process through things differently. Is it going to stink during the process? Sure. Jesus isn't being naive. He's not like, just put a smile on your face and endure like the famine and the brokenness and people abusing you. But he's just saying your perspective can be different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there's a profound relief in that, because all of a sudden that feeling of like, of what I said about I'm such a justice-driven person, just to recognize that like, not only is seeking justice not my responsibility, I can't prevent that earthquake. I can't prevent that from happening. I can't prevent any of that. So what if I just allow God to handle it and just trust that he's enough, you know?
Right. And even if you did, so I heard a really good sermon on this a couple weeks ago about retaliation and justice. This guy that's on staff named Michael, he taught it. But you said a comment that was just so simple and profound in the same moment. You just said, we are incapable of justice. Yeah. And I'm kind of paraphrasing it, or maybe you said that exact thing, but
close. Yeah.
And I was like, I remember when you said it, and I was at X-Church that day, but I was listening to it on my way home. And when you said it, I was like, that is so true. And because I'm wired like you, it was like one of those statements that just kind of, I really feel like the Holy Spirit like burned it in my brain. Yeah. Remember that you are actually incapable of justice. I have an idea of justice. Yeah. I have an idea of what will be best. But because I'm not pure in heart, totally pure in heart, I'm not sinless, I don't have an eternal perspective. Now I have an eternal perspective in the sense I'm thinking about eternity. I don't have it as in a God eternal perspective where he knows a sovereignty, the way he's working toward. Everything I do that I think will be great has the potential to be slanted by sin or influenced by sin. And so I don't have to fight for justice in everything. I have to strive to be just, to be fair in my life for me personally. But I want to extend grace, and I want to then surrender to God the things that steal my peace, the things that concern me, the evils that I see. Yeah. When I look at it and go, and then God will raise up leaders to address specific things, but that's where you have to be seeking the Holy Spirit. What do you want me to do? So like there are people who have a passion to end abortion. I 100% believe that was ordained by God. Yeah. That's their calling. People that want to end human trafficking, 100% fight the evil, right? I'm not saying give in and let evil reign, but when there are things just like right now, like the whole war in Ukraine, that genuinely disturbs me. Yeah, me too. Like I feel so hopeless in that, but I also recognize there's really not much I can do. I might be able to donate to some causes. I can contact my congressman and tell them like, I want us to do more for that. But beyond that, I can't do much. So I can't allow that just to rob my peace. And I think that's even a part of it, that some people think being a good citizen is being sad and stressed out all the time because like, oh, now I'm feeling the weight of all that. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, we're not designed to live that way. Yeah, yeah. And I'm always an advocate for, there's that last thing you said really hit too, where I think they really do go hand in hand. It is not my responsibility. I still want to steward over what I have well. Yeah. If I have the ability to vote, if I feel led to vote, I want to vote. Yeah. If I have the ability to call a congressman and say, I'm really upset about this, like this, I want my voice to be heard, great. You know what I mean? Exercise the opportunities and the things that we've been afforded in this country and use them with using, spiritual fruit in my life and with biblical moral and Christian ethic and by the leading of the Holy Spirit. It's not a hands-off attitude of, well, nothing matters. It's all meaningless. I'm just going to pray more. You can still steward over what you've been given well. I just know that my trust is in something far deeper than that phone call to my senator. You know what I mean? And I think that's where where the relief comes in of like, well, I just don't have to be the one to fix it. I can steward over what I have, but I'm not going to be the one to fix it. And theology didn't change a couple hundred years ago when America became a nation. You know what I mean? Like, so for all of human history, the idea of calling your congressman or woman, that's very brand new. That's so brand new. Voting, that's very, also very new and very limited. So theology didn't all of a sudden change where God goes, you know what, when we get to this time, when we get to this point now, I'm giving you guys a responsibility. Sure. I'm now deism, right? I'm now taking my hands off and allowing you guys. It's like, no, that's, thank goodness that's not the case. True. Yeah. All right. So here's the last thing I want to talk about then. I'm just gonna off memory hit you with a couple very common conspiracy theories. Sure. Not because I want your opinions on all of them. That's a way funnier podcast, but I'll do it. But just a couple, right? Yeah. Like, did we or did we not land on the moon? There's this very famous one. Is the Earth flat? Very public one. I don't know I don't know the numbers of how many people actually buy into it or don't. But these are like publicized one. COVID-19 of what's a conspiracy, what's not. What is the pandemic thing? All of there's for those three. There's 100 more. There's ones about 9/11. There's ones about Sandy Hook. Anytime you have a big tragedy or global event, it seems to be. There's JFK. There's something underneath what happened. Almost, if you look at any major historical event, there is a group of people who believe in a conspiracy. What does that do as a Christian participating in, not maybe all of those, but one of them or any of them? What does that do to the Christian witness? I think what it does is it makes you look like you don't have credibility, that you're not a true thinker, that you're not a true evaluator of facts. And I realize, like, so during, I'm going to speak bluntly about stuff. I'm basically so over walking on eggshells that I'm just like, so during COVID, that was a big one. People were just, saying it's not real, it's fake, it's all, it's Bill Gates, it's this and that's the government. And I'm like, in order for you to believe
the 5G thing, people were talking about that somehow, how that played a role. There's a lot of theories.
In order to believe that, you have to think that for the first time in human history, millions of people were able to coordinate together and keep a secret. And like, we are a culture of exposing information. If there were facts against that, it would have come out. Now, there might be elements of it, like there's a good chance it started in a lab in China, right?
I mean, absolutely.
Like that stuff that's coming out that now you're starting to get people to admit to.
Where before that would have gotten you flagged on the internet, stating something like that. Now it doesn't, because it's more, common knowledge.
And even with that, okay, it's like, you're like, okay, but all the other stuff. So if I'm a non-Christian and you're a Christian and you're believing in all of that, so you and I are friends, and all of a sudden I see you embracing all of these, what I'm calling secondary issues. So I'm not even saying they're not true, but they're secondary issues. That's a good way to say it. Sure. So you're embracing, whether it be a conspiracy theory of like, flat Earth, or what was the first thing you said?
Moon landing.
Moon landing. So like some of those can be comical, like people.
The flat Earth one's pretty funny. I think
it is funny, and like I really, honestly, I researched the moon landing, and there was a minute where, and
it's compelling stuff.
There's compelling. It's compelling enough that I go, if I found out tomorrow that we didn't land on the moon originally, I would go, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, sure.
So like that was
like
one
factual
to me.
Evidence.
Yeah. But when we start getting some of the deeper ones, COVID, different things like that, and we start to say like, okay, I'm going to believe in that. A person who's looking at you, so if that's you that's buying into that, I just go, okay, that person isn't really pursuing truth as much as they're pursuing an agenda, or they're gullible.
Yeah.
And so then when you come and want to speak to me about faith or want to post things about faith, I just join all that together.
Yeah.
So like, and I think we do this naturally, is in order to protect ourselves, we do process where we get information from. So like, if there is a source that constantly tells us, like if you know a person has a problem with lying, you just note that in your mind, and you basically don't give weight to everything that they say, because it's like, they might tell you 3 things that are true, but if they just told you 7 that were false, you go, what, I'm just not going to put much credibility in it. And that's what happens. So a person might still be your friend, they might still be kind to you, but you don't carry the weight anymore on the spiritual issues. And so if we're willing to still, we can do our own research and stuff, but not be as passionate to speak out about these secondary issues, it allows us to keep our credibility with the primary issue. Is I want you to know Jesus. And so that's my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is not to save America from the evil other political party. It's not to save it from breaking down even financially. I pray that doesn't happen, but that's not my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is honestly not even to save America. Hear me, salvation-wise. My ultimate goal is to save the people God brought into my life.
Yeah, well said.
You know what I'm saying? So like, whatever platform God gives me as an individual, or I literally do as a pastor, that platform I want to use to glorify His name. To make Him famous, as some say, like to glorify Him, to tell people about Him, to lead people to Him. That's my ultimate win. So I think with the other ones, we have to be really careful about embracing them, realizing it's just going to hurt our witness.
Yeah. And the conviction that I felt, even as you said that, isn't necessarily that I can't have an opinion about things, like,
right? And have discussions about it.
Have discussions about it that are kind and still are still, still celebrating spiritual fruit. We're all of a sudden not being unkind. We're not being not patient. So it's not that I can't have an opinion about stuff. It's just, at what point does that opinion come at cost of my witness, and is that cost worth it? That's the question. That's the thing of like, okay, if I have a big theory about the moon or about the earth being flat, that's fine. But like, the moment that becomes a priority, where I've become evangelistic about that, or I feel like that needs to be, I got to tell people about this, if that's going to come at a cost of me being able to share the gospel with somebody, I just can't imagine that that's worth it. One of the most probably powerful things that you ever told me, I'll never forget this. So like, it's something I think about all the time, where you told me, I want to say it was a conversation you had with a family member, and you just said, they asked your opinion on a current event, and you're just like, I just don't really have an opinion. And you said you found with age such a profound liberation in that, of saying like, that doesn't mean I'm dumb. 'Cause that's my fear. I don't want to look uninformed. I don't want to look dumb. I don't want someone to think, oh, he's just an idiot. He doesn't have any good thoughts about anything. So I always feel compelled, like, well, no, I need to have a profound thought.
And I do that. Like my son Titus is a real deep thinker, and he asked me a lot of questions. And even, I don't know, he listens to this podcast, but even a few days ago from when we were recording this, a few days ago, he asked me a few questions in the car about situations. And I said, I really don't know. Because he said, Dad, why do you think they do this? People who do this. And so in order to answer that question, I would have had to make it a character assessment. And I don't know them. I don't know them well enough. So I just said, I don't know. I don't have any idea.
That's powerful.
And because I don't want to model for my kids that I'm filling in the blank of, so someone's behavior seems to fall short of my expectations. And so I'm going to fill the blank in with negative. I'm just going to assume the worst. And that's what so many of the conspiracy theories require, is for you to genuinely think evil about a person or a group of people, that they're all lying to deceive. And I'm just like, you know what? That is possible that it could be true, but because I don't have facts for that, I'm just choosing not to fill that gap with hate, with rumors, with what could potentially be lies. So like when I did that series, I did a series where we're doing through a series, and I was talking about honesty. So we're in the Sermon on the Mount. I was talking about honesty. I said one of the lies that we tell is it could be true. Like I was just kind of giving like funny phrases, but it's one that I've noticed where people will pass on information that they don't know whether or not it's true or false. And they think because I don't know as a fact it's a lie, it's okay to share it. And I go, no, right? Like that still could be wrong. That could be totally a lie. And so like that's a part of it. And so I come from I'm like your family. My family is very opinionated about everything. And I had to learn to just go, you know what? I don't have to have an opinion about everything. And it is very freeing. But here's the other part too. I was going to say, like when you were speaking, have you ever won an argument and felt like that wasn't worth it? You know what I mean? Like, and I think the older I get, I've won arguments and I've gone, know what?
Not worth my character.
No, the cost of that. Like, here's a perfect example. This is a perfect example. I'm going to speak in real vague terms because I don't know who's going to listen. There was a moment recently where someone did something that offended me, and I found it very rude. It was rude to someone that I love, and for a moment I was about to correct this person and have enough edge to it that it was going to be like it was going to be a moment, right? Like you're going to sense that my body language, I'm upset at you, and I just was like, you know what? I'm not going to do it.
Wow.
This person came to me within a week, not knowing that I ever had that emotion, came to me within a week and asked me to pray for them. They sought me out. I've never once had a conversation with this person. They just know I'm a pastor.
Wow.
And I thought, you know what? If I would have won that moment by saying like what you did was offensive, and I've had that multiple times. Multiple people come up to me and ask me to pray for them. And I just thought, I said to my wife, and I was like, that was another reminder for me that I can win a moment and lose the ultimate goal.
Wow.
And I think conspiracy theories are that way too. Like
that is such a good
when we're talking about that, I can win the moment. I can this might even be true. I can convince someone. But I can lose the ultimate goal of like my witness and my credibility and just loving people well.
Yeah. I was going to say enough time has passed from this now to make it not super inflammatory, but I actually don't know if that's true. But I do think it's worth, because it's a very easy example to make it like practical in today's terms. I oftentimes think about the mask conversation about, do we listen? The government's asking us to do this. Should I mask up? By the end of the whole pandemic, where mask, no mask, here's what's going on, I found myself more than anything, where very early on, I was very willing to talk about it and argue about it. But here's what I think. Not a great idea. At the end of it, this was my default response. If someone were to send an article to me or ask me a question about mask, about if it's effective, my default response was like, maybe. Like,
maybe, right. Maybe. I love that answer.
There's a profound liberation in just saying maybe, and just saying, but I know that I'm supposed to submit to my government leaders, and if there's a chance I might keep someone safe, sure, I'll do it within reason.
But okay, so I love it.
It was so relaxing. Just maybe you could be right, but is it worth it to ruin that witness when someone comes up and asks for prayer? Is it worth it to dunk on somebody to make your point where it's like, oh,
okay, gosh. So let me ask you. So you and I are wired the same. Yeah. Genuinely are. We see in black and white. We see in extremes. Mm-hmm. I've had to learn to see in the gray and be comfortable in that. And that's what. So when you say maybe, what you're saying is it may be true, it may not be true, it may be this way, maybe that way, whatever. is it safe to say there would have been a good portion of your life that living in the maybe would have been very, very difficult and seemed to you as weak, maybe even as ignorant, like you're just uninformed? Because how many people, like if we push back on conspiracy theories, they would just go like do the research. Look, and you're like so the what they're implying is like you just haven't studied enough. Haven't you, I'm like leading question here, but like haven't you realized that the maybe though is actually in a very healthy place for you mentally, emotionally, relationally, and it actually is a very powerful place to be, is in the maybe of going like it could be either way. Like I'm just gonna acknowledge it can be both.
I would say yes, and I'd even take it a step further where it's taken more confidence to be able to say maybe.
For sure, right?
Okay, so like I don't need more, but when I was a young person, I had what's called little man's disease. So we're sitting at a table, but I had somebody, which by the way, somebody came up to me at church like 2 weeks ago, which is weird because they go to our church and they see me all the time, but I guess like walking past someone in public is a little different. But I walked past in the church parking lot, and she goes, "You are shorter than I thought." I see you on the I Could Be Wrong podcast. You are shorter than I thought. I was like, "Oh, you love hearing it." Yeah.
That's
cool.
People
Great.
are so weird. I'll come back to that. I want you to finish your thing.
I don't even remember what I was saying now. Oh goodness.
You said you have short man disease or complex.
Yeah. I have little man's disease. So for me, acknowledging that I might not have an answer is really hard. I feel like I constantly have to overcompensate in life. That's what I grew up thinking.
Right.
Because I'm shorter, because I'm smaller of stature, I feel like I have to brag about if I, when I was a kid, if I lifted a heavy weight or if I had a good athletic feat. I played football, and I feel like I always had to this is really childish. I'm going to admit something. I still have the impulse when I talk about my limited athletic career. If I talk about it with somebody, I always feel the impulse to clarify that I started at one point. Well, I was good at the start, whatever. No reason. Nobody cares. Nobody in the world cares about a 30-year-old high school football career. Nobody cares about that. But it's that there is a profound confidence that has to come with being able to say maybe. I really believe though it makes you look more intelligent. It makes you look smarter. It makes you look more confident. But it came at a cost. Like it took a lot of confidence and understanding that like I don't need to puff my chest out. I don't need to flex on people and say, look how strong I am or how informed I am. Look at all this that I've researched. Because a lot of times with people, the truth is, as you know, as being a type 8, I probably have researched it quite a bit. You nerd out on stuff and you fix it on things, and I want to know a lot about this thing, and whether it be a hobby or whether it be mass or whatever, I like being informed. And so, but rather than feeling the impulse to posture and to make myself seem smarter and bigger and stronger and more intelligent and more well-read, just to say I'm more confident than that. Yeah. I don't need to impose that on you. I don't need to try to prove something. I can keep my character intact. It's still hard sometimes, but just by saying, like maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I want to give encouragement to people that have found themselves going down these pathways is you have to make some radical changes to get to that place where you can be comfortable.
Oh, big time.
I think some of it is just limiting the amount of information you're taking in. I think we really do think it's our responsibility to be informed about everything. Yeah. And again, I want to say this is a modern phenomenon of being informed. Like the vast majority of human history, people, they found their information out, if they even found it out, would be months, sometimes years later. So there's a movie, Tom Hanks, I think, is in it, where it's like in the Western time, prairie days, where his whole job was he went from city to city reading the newspaper.
Wow. And
so like he would go in and they would get crowds and he would read and people would pay whatever, a nickel or something like that. And he would read to them. And I thought that's how information used to get spread. And think about how delayed that is. That's because insane. He's picking it up at one far city and then taking it across the country. And now it's instant on your phone. So we think like, in my responsibility, I have to be informed. But just, again, that you have to recognize the source that you're pulling it from. Yeah. It's driven by money. It's driven by fear because they want to manipulate you to get you control. So like you have to like check out of some of those things and disconnect. Like I've taken social media off my phone, so I haven't had it for weeks now. It's a game changer. Most days I forget to even check it now. Yeah. So like I realized today I haven't checked Facebook in 3 days. Yeah. So I get on and I have like.
Isn't that great though?
It's totally great. And I gotta be honest, Facebook's boring to me now.
Facebook's pretty boring.
So like once I separated from it, where I used to probably check Facebook any dull moment I had.
Almost
it was
just
just
at a default because it's something to do. Yeah.
Boom, and I would hit it. And I was like, you know what? I don't like that. So now like I get on it and I basically don't even scroll. Instagram, also it's not on my phone anymore. And I'll look at that a little bit more because it's pictures and I love the stories that go with it. Mm-hmm. But even then, like I don't need it as much. But I would just say, recognize the source that you're allowing in. Like I'm going to say it bluntly, but there are very liberal and very conservative biased organizations that are manipulating people. Fox News is manipulating. CNN is manipulating.
Oh yeah.
MSNBC is manipulating. I mean, like, Most of the media does lean left, but they're manipulating people just to get it. And so you have to recognize that and go, you know what, they're trying to make me more afraid. And so they're making things more dramatic. They're only pointing out the negative. Mm-hmm. And once you start to limit that access to your heart, you'll start to find a peace. Yeah. And you'll start to find a healthier rhythm. And I think it will make you a little bit more sensitive to the Holy Spirit to say, okay, now in my life, what is the cause you want me to care about? Mm-hmm. What is the moment you want me to care about?
And it's just easier to say, man, I just really don't know. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I'm just not that invested into it. Yeah. You know, it's like when that's not your whole world, when that's not something you're starting and ending your day with, it almost feels like, wow, I spent way more time with my kids today. That's what I'd like to talk to you about.
For sure.
And that makes my life better. I feel happier when I'm invested in them and I'm not just mindlessly scrolling. I think we talked about once, we didn't talk about this in the social media episode, but we probably should have. I remember I saw an interview with a musician once who said, you know what we're one generation from? A teenager saying like, you want to see an impression of my dad? Like sitting there scrolling on his phone. That's terrifying. Yeah. Because that's like, my generation is now having kids and that's we're all addicted to our phones. Right. There's going to be a whole generation of kids that come up that are, I see it with my kids. I actually think we talked about a Bible study podcast. That's what I'm thinking of. But I'll know when my daughter Darby's upset with me because I'm on my phone. Well, she'll come up and like grab my face, be like, "Hello, I'm right here," and it's like, "Oh, that's the most convicting." It's so gut wrenching because it's like, why am I glued to this stupid thing that's not even making my life better? Yeah, you know.
I got 3 sad stories with that. So one is my wife. What she'll do is she'll go, "I'll just wait till you're done." Oof. And she said it so polite, but it's like I'm like, all right,
you get the point. Yeah.
My daughter would do the same thing. She'll come in my room, she'll hop on my bed, and if I'm on my computer, working on something. She won't even say anything. She just goes silent until I look at her. And then if I look away while she's talking to me, she stops talking.
Gosh.
But she's not even doing I don't think she's like intentionally. I think it's just, she knows I just disconnected. Oh. And then the third one is my dog knocks my phone out of my hands.
Get out of here.
He will come over to get pet. And like, if I'm on my phone, he will push
That's
it
the
down.
saddest one out of all.
I know. And he'll nudge it with his
Poor
nose.
Bane.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Sorry, buddy.
Yeah. Like, that's so funny.
Well, that's super real. Yeah. What were you going to say about where I said some ladies like, you're short of
that thought? All right. So I don't know if this is a hot take or this is reality. One of the strangest things about being a pastor is people's willingness to critique things about our physical appearance or clothes or something that I would just never do to a person. So like someone could walk up to me and go like, wow, you're really getting a lot of gray in your beard. You know, like I've had that in the past. Or
I feel like really empowered to say stuff like that.
Like I had one time a person goes, oh, I'm glad you got a haircut. Your hair looks so much better short. And I thought like I might grow it out again in the future, you know. And like people were like, I had people tell me in the past, like these are high schoolers when I was a youth pastor, but they're like, you don't match. And first of all, I did, but they're like, you don't match. And I'm like, I would never, just walk up to a person. In what world is that okay? But like people will say like, oh, you're filling out, or like, I mean, just all kinds of stuff.
Weird.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that you're so vulnerable when you talk to people that people just feel like somehow that they can make that opinion because like, oh yeah, you tell me about your personal life all the time. That means I can now talk about your personal life with you. It's like, man, I don't know. I've had to have that feeling with like where people will comment on my appearance a lot lately because I've just been like the last like year and a half of I've tried to get healthier. And people will say a lot of stuff, and sometimes it'll feel really good, and other times it feels like if I care now, I'll care later. It's like the second you say something mean, it's probably gonna matter then too. So I gotta like check it. I'm like, no, just don't. Just keep your eyes forward. But people do feel like that. Like you're shorter than I thought. Like just don't say anything. Like you don't have to tell me that.
Why would you ever say that to someone?
Like I haven't been insecure about that my whole life.
Right? Yeah.
What the heck? All right. Do you have anything else to add to this topic, whether it be about Christians and conspiracy or real threats or anything along those lines?
I guess my final encouragement would be if you find yourself really concerned about a specific issue in researching it, I would always ask if you're really concerned about it, get a very spiritual, mature person to engage you in that process or engage them. Good. So like if there's something and you go like, okay, I can't shake the fact that this topic is always on my heart. So like, I know I've always used these examples, but people that had that about abortion and about human trafficking, about the homeless and others. And they're just like, you know what, there's a lot of evils being done and I cannot shake it. Go have a spiritual conversation with a spiritual leader. Go talk with a pastor, a director, maybe a small group leader. Talk with them and get someone else's advice, because one of the things that can happen is we get so into the bubble of research that we can start to lose a little bit of touch with reality and even the proper heart that we need to have. Yeah. And sometimes you just need that friend to go like, I hear you, but what you're saying is a little bit off. So like I've had people come to me really, really, really struggling with issues, and they'll tell me like, this is what's going on in our country, this is what's going on in the world. And I'm like, man, I'm so sorry, like that's stressing you out. And then I'll research it later, and find out like there's just no truth to it.
Yeah.
And so like to have to say to those people like, hey, you're not going to like this, but there's no truth. But they're so in that world, they can't see the lies anymore.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you need someone else. So I would just say like, don't try to do all of this alone. Invite people in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us again for the I Could Be Wrong podcast. If you enjoyed today, if this conversation was meaningful or was helpful to you, or if it was just something that made your drive a little bit better, do us a favor and share it with someone who you think might be interested in this specific topic, or somebody who just might value healthy conversation. Or if you have someone in your life who's terrible at healthy conversation, send it to it passive aggressively. I'm kidding. Don't send it to it passive aggressively. But again, the goal of this podcast really is to model, hey, this is how Christians can talk to each other. It doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be an argument. We can still disagree. We can talk about tough things, still see eye to eye, and still point glory to God. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week.